In all, 3 Ming emperors issued edicts conferring special status on Mount Lu, and 2 steles were set up there bearing imperial inscriptions. But during the Ming dynasty and afterwards, Lushan had an important position in Chinese politics. Today, the villas of Lushan are famous around the world. They have stood on the mountain for 100 years, and each has had several owners. During the Ming dynasty, Mount Lu enjoyed the same status as the country's other famous mountains: Mount Tai in the east, Mount Hung in the south, Mount Hua in the west, Mount Hung in the north, and Mount Sung in the hinterland. Instead of the 5 famous mountains that had been celebrated since the 8th century, there were now 6. Little remains on Mount Lu today to tell us of Ming dynasty times. However, in the few surviving Ming dynasty buildings, there are subtle reminders of the emperor's influence here. Tianchi Pagoda, built during the Ming dynasty, belongs to Tianchi Temple. Strangely, the typical Taoist design of the 8 trigrams decorates the pagoda's top. How can we explain this?
朱元璋啊，对于他的思想武或没有那么严格的单一化，他是什么样的统治有利于我，我就这样都吸收，也是朱元璋自己呢夺取政传的全国政传的道路上啊。这个广用各种人才、各种信仰的人呢有关系，所以呢，他就这么做了，以致呢，后来到了那个大坚持的那个塔呀、古塔上啊，也是把这个佛教的这个整个的符号为主体啊，也加上一些道教的符号、阴阳语啊，怎么也是这么做的。
The imperial family maintained a pragmatic attitude towards religion. They also created myths, many of which featured Mount Lu. Historical records from the Ming dynasty refer to 13 occasions when dragons soared from Lushan. The dragon was a symbol of supreme power during feudal times in China. There is, of course, no evidence of dragons really appearing over Lushan. The official references were clearly designed to enhance the sense of supreme dignity enjoyed by the mountain. In the year 1403, Zhu Di succeeded his father to the imperial throne as the Yongle Emperor. He also inherited his father's reverence for Mount Lu. One of the first edicts he issued after coming to power created a new imperial garden centered on Tianchi. The borders of the garden were marked by 5 old men peaks in the east, Bai Yuan Peak in the south, Mount Ma-an in the west, and Jiangjing Hall in the north. Within this imperial garden, tree felling and hunting were prohibited. For the next 200 years, thanks to the ban imposed by the Yongle Emperor, Lushan's natural environment thrived. The ban on hunting and felling trees meant the valleys were filled with lush green vegetation and sweet flowers, and the air was filled with the singing of birds. Later Ming rulers all followed the founding emperor's example in revering Mount Lu. The mother of the dynasty's 14th emperor was a devout Buddhist. She presented scrolls of scriptures and gilded statues of the Buddha to Yellow Dragon Temple on Mount Lu as a token of the imperial family's favor for Buddhism. To repay the Dowager Empress's generosity, the monks built a pavilion in the dense forest near Yellow Dragon Temple. A stele in the pavilion was carved with an imperial edict and an inscription praising the Dowager Empress for her gift of the Buddhist sutras. In all, 3 Ming emperors issued edicts conferring special status on Mount Lu, and 2 steles were set up there bearing imperial inscriptions. These honours are testament to the prestige and influence enjoyed by Mount Lu during the Ming dynasty. Previously, the mountain had attracted men of letters and monks, but during the Ming dynasty and afterwards, LUSHAN had an important position in Chinese politics.
如果是要庐山是政治名山的话，那应该是说朱元璋前后，在朱元璋之前，应该已经是开始了。因为一个王朝推翻另外一个王朝的斗争，或者是农民起义部队内部的斗争，那都属于政治斗争的这样一个范围。所以应该说，把这个政治名山这个时间呢，向前推移几百年。
Because of the imperial family's reverence for Mount Lu during the Ming dynasty, it became the custom among the noble and scholar classes to pay regular visits to the mountain. Mount Lu is often veiled in mist. As the mist thickens, people on the mountain can lose their bearings. This happened to the Ming dynasty artist Tang Yin when he climbed Mount Lu. He'd become an aide to Zhu Qianhao, the Prince Ning. However, when he discovered that the prince was plotting against the emperor, Tang Yin, he realized that his life was in danger, and so he feigned madness. Having made good his escape from court, Tang Yin headed home to Suzhou, stopping at Lushan on the way. In the dense mist, he wrote the lines, "How many ranges of peaks has the towering Kuanglu, shrouded in dense mist and rain?" This was, in fact, a reference to the difficulty of perceiving the future in a domain when the imperial authority was as vast as mountains and as impenetrable as the mist-shrouded Mount Lu. By the middle of the 17th century, the Ming Empire was facing collapse. The dream of eternal rule was shattered. In 1644, the Ming Empire, established by Zhu Yuanzhang, was overthrown. It thus suffered the same fate as every other imperial dynasty in Chinese history. Although the empire had collapsed, Mount Lu continued to stand resolute. Shrouded by the autumn clouds and winter snow, it presided in silence over the rise and fall of another imperial dynasty. Chinese people liken nature to a living being. They believe that the evolution of all things in the world is determined by heaven's will. However, the downfall of one dynasty after another raised the question, what is heaven's will? Generations of Chinese people have pondered this question. "16 years after the downfall of the Ming Empire, a philosopher by the name of Huang Zongxi came to Lushan. After leaving the mountain, he wrote a book entitled Writing of Far-Sighted Men in Adversity, to be read by monarchs. The first chapter of the book is on monarchy. In it, Huang Zongxi, for the first time in 2,000 years, raised a number of questions concerning imperial rule. Did the authority of the emperor really come from heaven? What was the will of heaven that determined the prosperity and decline of feudal regimes? A further 300 years later, China, after surviving numerous periods of turbulence and upheaval, at last stood on the threshold of a new dawn. A vicious historical cycle had been broken, and people were finally free to decide the direction their future should take. On the eve of this historic moment, a great personality who loved Lushan wrote a poem containing the following two lines. Were nature sentient, she too would pass from youth to age. But man's world is mutable. Cities become mulberry fields. Mount Lu, having experienced so many dramatic changes, is today a tourist attraction. Few of the visitors remember the glory the mountain enjoyed in the past, but evergreen Mount Lu is still veiled by drifting clouds all year round. A reminder that for mountains, all the events in the human world are just fleeting moments.
Early in April, I, Edward S. Little, received a letter from the chairman of Qinggan Missionary Association asking me to prepare and read a paper on the subject of how I obtain the position of cooling. I feel that it is my duty to accept the invitation. It will be necessary in this narration to use the first personal pronoun frequently, for this story cannot be told indeed without the involvement of me.
It's 5:20 in the morning and the sunlight penetrates the dense mist over Lake Poyang. The first rays of the sun spread eastward across the valleys of Lushan. At 5:40, the first truck climbs the mountain. It's loaded with vegetables and meat purchased at the mountain's foot. At 6 o'clock, the breakfast stands open for business. By 6:30, the streets are packed with vehicles and people. The small town of Guling is fully awake. Winter in Guling is quiet. In the summer and autumn, people converge on the town from every direction. Newcomers to Lushan are often surprised by the small town where they can find everything they need. Throughout the year, people from the surrounding areas spend their weekends on Lushan.
我到过2处孤岭街，一在庐山，二在台湾。这2处孤岭街相去很远，但是有一种内在的生命气质，神奇的相似，就是它都是熙熙攘攘的，它都是那样一种带着一种生活里面澎湃的情趣，而那些人呢，就是带着一种朴素的知足的快乐。庐山的孤岭街很漂亮，因为两边有风景，窄窄的一条小石板道，绕出来就是孤岭街的集市，你就是能够感觉到那些朴素的生活在这个地方带着一种飞扬的深情。所以孤岭街这是一个朴素的名字，但是它是一个诗意的名字。
Just over a century ago, however, no one would have guessed that a town would one day grow up in this valley. Back then, scarcely a soul ever visited the place, except woodcutters and the occasional adventurer. In the early winter of 1886, a young Westerner, accompanied by a Chinese guide, climbed up the ancient path with 99 twists. He was Edward Selby Little, who also went by the Chinese name Li De. He had come from Zhenjiang to Hankou, and from there he had taken a boat to Jiujiang. He was just 22 years old, and he had come with the express purpose of selecting a plot of land where he could build a house in which to spend the summer. In the years leading up to Little's arrival on Mount Lu, China experienced a series of setbacks that heralded worse to come. The rebellion known as the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom had broken out, and the man chiefly responsible for suppressing it, Sun Guofan, had died of illness. The Sino-French War had ended with the defeat of the Qing government. The westernization movement led by Li Hongzhang had begun to lose its momentum, and under heavy pressure, the Qing government had opened the country's doors. Jiujiang had been an open commercial port ever since the signing of the Treaty of Tianjin 35 years before Little's arrival.
九江啊，在1861年的时候，作为这个通商口岸，向西方开放。很多的这个商人，还有海关的职员、传教士纷纷涌到了九江。李德利呢，也是这个传教士当中的一员呢，就住在这个九江。
Like many other cities on the Yangtze, Jiujiang was a popular place for foreigners to settle. Although they enjoyed the convenience of its accessibility by water, they found it difficult to put up with the summer heat there. A century ago, the hot weather, combined with the inadequate sanitation facilities in such cities as Shanghai, Nanjing, Wuhan and Jiujiang along the Yangtze, caused frequent outbreaks of disease. But fortunately, not far away, there was a cool haven. Mount Lu has always been famous for its pleasant summers. Travellers tired after a long journey and suffering from the hot weather will find a place to refresh themselves when they come to the mountain. Mount Lu's towering peaks and deep valleys are bounded by the Yangtze to the north and Lake Poyang to the east. Here the rainfall is abundant, and the higher the altitude, the lower the temperature falls. The cool of the mountain is an irresistible lure for people living in the heat below. In 1840, a group of French missionaries had a villa built beside Lotus Grotto at the foot of Mount Lu. Later, some Russians rented several houses behind the main hall of Nine Peak Temple, which they converted into a European-style villa. It seems that Edward Selby Little may have tried to purchase a plot at Nine Peak Temple, but failed. But having experienced the contrast between scorching Zhejiang and cool Lushan, and learning of the success of the French and Russians, Little was determined not to give up. And so one day he climbed between Bull and House Ridge peaks as far as Daughter's Town. From there, as he gazed down on the flat Changchung Basin below, not even he could have realized that a new era in the history of Lushan was about to open.
The mountaintop was a wild west given over to tigers, wild pigs, and old chapel. The wilderness bring the mountain a smell of spread. As I know, the old mountain belonged to nobody for a long time.
Today, the villas of Lushan are famous around the world. There are 600 of them in all, each individually designed. They have stood on the mountain for 100 years, and each has had several owners. But one thing they all share in common is that, in every case, the original owner bought the plot of land for the house from Edward Selby Little. From the moment when he had stood in Daughter's Town, Little had been working on a plan to buy land and develop the area. But his vision encompassed not only villas. He would build a paradise among the natural scenery. So he applied to the Chinese government to lease him the land at Lushan.
清政府呢，对土地的控制还是很严格的。当时李德利呢，他是作为一个私人租地，是这么样一种行为，肯定是会遇到很大的这个困难的。当初他呢是用了一些不正当的手段，他找了一个地方的保人，是吧？通过这个地方的这个中国人去把这个地租下来，租下来以后呢，再转租给他。当时的清政府呢，听到这个李德利这个名字，是吧，以为是个中国人，于是呢就答应了这个转租的这么样一个买卖，是吧？等到这个李德利去交契税的时候呢，发现是一个外国人，觉得自己是上当了，所以呢又要求把这个租约收回。
Little understood Chinese bureaucracy very well, and he soon came up with a solution. He got the British consul to apply pressure on the Chinese authorities, and at the same time, he offered bribes to the Chinese official responsible. Within a few months, he had succeeded in leasing 300 hectares of land at Lushan. Little decided to build a new road linking the Jiulian Road with Guling. His idea was to facilitate travel from Zhejiang to Lushan. Before long, French, Russians and Americans had arrived. They carved up the land around Lushan. By 1927, there were 560 villas in Guling, which were home to thousands of people.